Hi, this is Nick Williams, and I'm talking to David Hamilton. Hi, David. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Nick, how are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good, thank you. Well, it's lovely to talk to you. You know, we've known each other for a number of years, and our paths have crossed, and we've had lots of fascinating conversations. Mm-hmm. So when I heard you had your new book out called I Heart Me in February, I thought, I'd love to host a talk for you. So I invited you to come give a talk on February the 12th. And this is your 8th book, isn't it?
It is, yeah, 8th, and it's the one that took me the longest to write.
Yeah, my sense is that this is an evolution for you, because I know we've had conversations about, you've written a lot about science and research. I always kind of said to you, what I wanted to hear more of your voice, and it feels to me like this book is more about your voice, what you've got to say on this subject. Is that
definitely? There's a lot more of me in it, and in fact, my other books had taken about 5 months to write, and that's because, I was writing about stuff that I knew, and then I was really just finding scientific evidence to back up what I knew.
Right.
But when you write a book on self-love, it doesn't really work that way, because to be honest, I didn't really know that much about it. And so therefore, when you're writing that kind of book, the content will always track very closely. It will mirror where you are in your life. And it turns out, I'm a slow learner, because it took me 2 years.
You're slow, but I think you're still pretty quick. There's a lot of people that have got a lot to learn about self-love. I know I have. I don't think anybody's really cracked that one.
Well, for me, I realised that I had what you call a self-love deficit. And here's the irony, right? I'm a self-help author, and I've written 7 books, and I realised that I hadn't touched the subject of self-love, and that's probably because I call it a self-love deficit. It's having not a lot of self-love. Sure. And that's the irony. I'm writing self-help books, but I didn't need to be filled with self-love to write my other books, because it's science and inspiration and stuff mixed. But that's why this book was so challenging for me, because I had to really learn as I was going along, and I had to develop myself.
Yeah.
So the book actually needed a personal transformation, and that's why it took so long.
Yeah, well, it seems to me like the classic example of we teach and learn at the same time, and whatever you've chosen to teach, you're going to be learning about it. So you told me that actually the first draft of the book was rejected because... Why did Hay House reject it?
Because I had tried to write it in the same way that I'd written my other books. What I knew about self-love at that point obviously wasn't very much, and I tried to find some science to pad it out, and I handed it to Hay House, and the MD, Michelle Pilley, asked me to come for a chat, and she was really nice.
Headmistress, was it?
And basically said along the lines of, if we release this book, it might be damaging to your career. As it stands right now, and that was very honest, and I've never told anyone that, so that's the first time I've ever told anyone that on an interview. But she was very nice about it, and she said, "Look, what do you need?" And we had a long conversation about, and I said, "Look, the problem of having a deadline to write a self-help book, a self-love book, is like saying you will love yourself by June the 30th.
By the time you hand in the manuscript."
Yeah. And that was my original deadline, was the 30th of June 2013. And you just can't write a self-love book like that, because you can't put a deadline on self-love. It's got to come by itself. So Michelle did an amazing thing, and she said, "Look, no deadline. No deadline. In fact," she said, "why don't you take some time off and then get back to me when you think that you're in a different space yourself, that you feel you can progress with the book." And that's how it evolved, and I really finished it over a year later.
Brilliant. I think that would be very reassuring for people, listening to this and hearing you to know that we all have, well, we don't have to, but it's an invitation to go on our own journey of transformation. I know that I've looked at the book already, and, you talk a lot about the learned ideas and the programming and conditioning that we have. And it seems to me it's a very practical book, perhaps much more practical than your other books, about how to let go of the programming and conditioning that we've all inherited to some degree that block that self-love. Is that right?
That's right, and the reason it's more practical is because, as I said, I had to really live the principles as I was going along, so that I could write the book from a sense of, I know what I'm talking about because I'm there, or I've been there very recently, and this is what I found to kind of work. So there's actually 27 practical exercises in the book, and that's so different from my previous books. Of course, there is a lot of science as I play around with some science to back up some concepts, but the difference is the amount of self-help, invitations there, and the amount of exercises to really help people to to put the principles into practice, because I had to learn this stuff for myself.
So do you feel good that you've kind of gone to a new level of kind of authentic self-disclosure, if you like?
I do, and one of the humbling things is I don't think there's an end point. I don't think there's a point where you can say, look, I love myself totally, look at me, I'm great now. That space doesn't really exist. I don't think it's just you're more progressed along a journey that feels better, and a lot of the issues and difficulties and problems that I had privately, I've dealt with and worked through, so I feel myself I'm in a much better space than I've been in before.
And it seems like an obvious question, but the question is, why is it so important? Why is self-love so important, do you think?
The difficult thing is most people don't realise they're running low in the self-love tank, so to speak. And so it shows up in your life. It manifests in a whole range of different ways, from lacking of self-confidence. I mean, despite my job, as a public speaker and a writer, I have had major difficulties with self-confidence. That nobody can notice, because when I'm on stage giving a talk, nobody knows what's really going through your head 5 minutes before you're on stage.
Yeah.
And it manifests in financial difficulties, relationship difficulties, difficulties finding love, difficulties with intimacy, difficulties in even expressing yourself, people giving away their power, feeling weak, feeling small. A whole host of different ways are how this self-love manifests. So if you start to look at the problems in your life, quite often you can track them back to something to do with how you feel about yourself and what you think about yourself. Yeah.
I would tend to agree. I've asked you the question, but I think it's actually the fundamental of kind of human existence, really. And
I found I tracked a lot. Yeah, totally. I tracked a lot of my difficulties back to the same kind of root issues, and so what I tried to do was fuse what I understood in terms of science and self-help and neuroscience, to give practical approaches. Like, one of the things I realised quite early on was that self-love, it's as much biology as psychology. In other words, you can actually treat it by treating some biology as well as classically looking into your deep spiritual issues and stuff. Wow. Because whatever's going on in your mind, your consciousness, your beliefs will always show up to some extent in your body, quite often in the way that your muscles hang and hold themselves, your body language, your facial expressions. And actually you can start to put some little tools into place where you can really work on your body language, your facial expressions, how you hold your body, how you walk, how you sit, how you breathe, all these kind of things that can actually feed back and shape your brain circuits and ultimately wire in a state of self-love, which makes it much more attainable, much faster as well, because you're using the simple process of how the brain and the body actually work together.
Right, so you're teaching people how they can intervene in
Absolutely.
different ways to increase their amount of self-love.
Yeah, and what it does, it changes a bit of how you feel. It puts you into a different space where you can then tackle some of your issues, not from a point of weakness where you feel small, that these are all too big for you, but from a place of power, and you can actually look on them and say, oh my, I can see what's going on here in my life. So by playing around with those kind of neuroscience bits, you can actually approach problems and challenges from a completely different space. That's what I noticed anyway.
Right. So you're going to come and give this talk for us on February the 12th. Now, I know that people are going to have a laugh. I don't know whether other people have said it, but I called you like the love child of Deepak Chopra and Billy Connolly, because you've got the science and the humour, which is so unusual. So anybody coming to the talk is going to get a good laugh. They're going to learn a lot. They're going to go away with a copy of your book and signed, hopefully, as well. What else are you going to share with people during the evening?
Well, first of all, that's pressure. I've got to think of some jokes now. Some good patter. No, what else? Well, as well, what I'm going to really be giving people is practical strategies, really simple. Just a small amount of what I think are the really powerful practices that you can literally start using today. In fact, by the time you've finished the evening, you'll already have practiced one of them, because I'll make sure you do it right there and then. Wow. a little physical thing that we can do that's instant.
So we're going to be more self-loving by the end of the evening?
By the end of the evening, absolutely.
Is that guaranteed?
That's guaranteed, yeah.
More pressure.
And here's my disclaimer at the bottom of the screen.
Okay. Well, thanks, David. I'm really looking forward to seeing you down in London in February and hosting you for the evening. So anybody watching this, we'd love you to come along. It'll be a great evening. You'll learn a lot from David. You'll have a laugh. And, one of the things I find is just the connections you make at events like this as well. When people are open to these kind of conversations and this kind of stuff. I think, whoever's watching this, if you come along, you're actually going to probably make some good friends and make some really strong connections. So if this appeals to you, thank you for taking the time to watch this, and look forward to seeing you in February the 12th. So thank you, David. It's lovely to talk to you, and see you in London in February.
See you in London in February. Can't wait.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.